we got 30 minutes, and I want to get, so what I'm going to do is, since all of you guys had very specific presentations, I'm going to ask specific questions in the order in which you guys presented. So I'm going to begin with Professor Cummins. So Professor Cummins, I want to deal with the term, just the specific term psychedelic, and that it means, right, the connotative and denotative simply means altered states, right? And I want to begin with that because my question is, do you think that the term psychedelic soul exists because many white critics and listeners don't see Black people as well-rounded, which means that they don't see them as human because they have to create a term psychedelic soul when in a sense psychedelic is only about altered states, which means they are applying that Black people are generally not interested in altered states of being, meaning they're not interested in critical thinking. So what do you think about that notion as the creation of that term?
Now you're answering my questions. I can. First, I just want to thank everyone who's hanging out with us today. I really appreciate it, and all of the feedback in the chat. You all are always amazing. But to that point, Celie, I think it's a good one, and that's why I really wanted to hone in on the psychedelic aspect, because in that Neil Carlin interview where Prince says, I don't mind, the throwback and looking at psychedelic music, but the thing is, psychedelia is always seen as something white. It's psychedelic rock, and it's to that very notion. We live in a nation that loves to separate and categorize and then assign value based on those categories, with our value always being at the bottom. So when you have an ideology that sees Black people not only absent of humanity, but absent any type of dimension or depth or layer, it's inconceivable that psychedelic soul even exists, or that psychedelic funk exists. So just using the language, the terms that have been set forth, in the game, the goalposts are always moving when Black people enter the game, but just using the language that's there was psychedelic soul, there was psychedelic funk, and it was a continuation to me. If you think about psychedelic rock, it was kind of born, and like a lot of things on trend with white people, it came and went away, but Black people were still innovating and evolving it, and eventually going past that 60s period into the 70s before that started to kind of morph into disco and funk and in a different way. But so I think that, yeah, it's a way for white people, by separating us rather from psychedelic rock or just psychedelic music, having to have these subcategories, it's just another way of putting us off in the corner and not acknowledging the fact that we do have altered states, that we are of dimension, that there are many levels and layers. And that was my point in the presentation, that yes, the Beatles were an influence on anybody born in a particular time. How could they not be? But let's not always move whiteness to the front of the bus. There were a whole lot of Black people on that bus before they got on, and who were also getting on, that Prince was being influenced by, who were altering the course of music.
Thank you. Wonderful.
Now I'm gonna shut up to take your turn.
Thank you. Wonderful as always. Brother Zach, I have a cosplay question, but I'm gonna hold that to the end. My first question for you is, taking in consideration T.S. Eliot's brilliant essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, right? Where T.S. Eliot says that the goal of the artist is to master the history before him, but to then carve out a unique niche for oneself in this place and time. In what ways do you see, based on your discussion around the world in the day, taking T.S. Eliot's advice of understanding and mastering all that came before it, but carving out its new unique niche for its particular time?
Yeah, well, it's actually funny because when I was kind of grappling with this, what you just said, citing T.S. Eliot, made me think about the concept, the anxiety of influence, right? And that's one of the things that, and for those who don't know, the anxiety of influence is Gosh, I'm on the spot, and so the name of the academic is escaping me, but a very famous and very kind of stuffy. Yes, Harold Bloom. Thank you so much, Robert Loss. Harold Bloom is a very famous and very stuffy like English professor of English literature, and
Yes.
he wrote this famous book called the Anxiety of Influence, which is about how like as a poet or as any kind of artist, you're constantly struggling with the everyone who's come before you basically, and it's this struggle of like, how am I going to create something that is worthwhile in a world where Shakespeare exists, or whoever. And so that was something that I was thinking about a lot. And for a while, I was thinking like, do I want to do something with this? I decided not to, because like bringing Harold Bloom into it is like, why? There's already enough to talk about. But that I do think that there's a little bit of something else. And I think when you're a Black artist, a very, I think, proud and self-consciously Black artist, which I think Camila is always amazing at bringing that out. There's a different dimension to it, right? Because it's not just like, how do I create something as great as the Beatles? It's also like, this influence is being sort of placed upon me. So how do I function in a world where there's this I use the term hegemony in my presentation, and it's a little melodramatic, but it's also not really melodramatic, because when you're a musician working within a rock, a broadly rock context after the 60s, you kind of have to grapple with the Beatles whether you like it or not. And so I do think that Around the World in a Day is that. And I also think Camila's presentation and my presentation can coexist in that sense. Because I think that the Beatles were in the mix, but I think he was making a purposeful statement, by saying, well, sure, I'm drawing from this psychedelic context, which is often coded as white, but also my heroes, the people that I'm choosing to shout out, like Sly Stone, like the Chambers Brothers, like Stevie Wonder, are equally important, and maybe even more important than what Rolling Stone says is my influence. So I think one of the things, and I'm rambling already, so I'm coming to a head. Grand Funk Railroad, exactly. Um, I think Prince wanted to be the summation and he wanted to be the end result of everything that had come before him, the whole spectrum of music.
Mm-hmm.
There's that famous quote. He said, "I am music."
Right.
And I think the Beatles is one of those groups, but they weren't the most important one. And that's why I wanted to end with the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame performance, not only because it's this like triumphal moment for him, but also because it's him really claiming his space in that pantheon where, Prince is not considered classic rock,
Mm-hmm.
right? And maybe he should be. Like, if we're really going to talk about, rock music or broadly popular music of the last 50, 60 years that is quote unquote classic, Prince should be there. And not necessarily just the songs where he's shredding on the guitar either. So I do think that Around the World in a Day was an early example of him carving out that place.
Yeah, yeah, perfect, perfect. And I think that to connect you and Professor Common's presentations, the issue is not about it being called psychedelic. It's about making psychedelic one thing or one group or one race. And I think that both of y'all brilliantly show that no, Prince is pulling from psychedelic. He's just not pulling from that one specific anchor or place of whiteness or one group from which they're pulling for. So I thank both of y'all for that. Brother Chris Johnson. I love that you anchored your presentation on one of the quotes, "the land of sin of plenty," because it immediately brought to mind for me Dick Gregory's work in healthcare. And Dick Gregory made it very, very clear that often people who are obese are also malnourished, right? What we forget about obesity is that it is a part of being malnourished. So my question to you is, could you talk a little bit more about with the latter echoing the land of sin of plenty, right? And that Simon and discussing how the latter can help humanity be balanced in all things, though, so that we don't find ourselves both obese and malnourished simultaneously.
Well, I think that Prince was talking about, uh, you know, life in general, the journey of life, and the aspiration toward salvation and, you know, wholeness. And I think nutrition, is part of that wholeness. And I think that's where it connects to what Prince was talking about. I think you're spot on, Celie, when you say that obesity is also linked to malnutrition. I'm a heavy guy myself, and I wouldn't say I'm suffering from malnutrition, but for me it's more the inactivity and the being sedentary because of my disability.
Mm-hmm.
But I could definitely see that connection where Prince was talking about, the striving of humanity to be healthy and whole, and nutrition and malnutrition is a part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And it definitely plays into Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which I talked
Mm-hmm.
about. And you know, uh, there is the capacity or the potential to slide back into those levels of deficiency that I talked about on
Mm-hmm.
the hierarchy. So we need to be cognizant of that, and we need to be, as a society, we need to be cognizant of, you know, everybody's entitled to proper nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's entitled to um, higher self-esteem and
Mm-hmm.
higher spiritual awareness, and
Mm-hmm.
it's all part of, being healthy and holistic in one sense of humanity. So I think that's where it connects with Prince's message of striving to be, uh, you know, striving to achieve our highest potential.
And in doing so, making sure that we are not spiritually malnourished as we are physically malnourished.
Exactly, exactly. Um, yes,
Okay.
that's spot on, spot on.
I just wanted to make sure we brought that home. All right, brother Ali, quick. Okay, so and I know it's going. I'm gonna get there. I promise I'm gonna get there. Juneteenth, because I'm an old boy from Clarksdale, Mississippi, so everything is related to the blues. Juneteenth is the best example of the blues aesthetic because what we are doing with Juneteenth is that we are simultaneously discussing a hell that was done to us while at the same time celebrating, right? Nobody other than Black people does the type of job of we can at the same time discuss the hell and the celebration of the getting through of the hope. With that in mind, can you talk a little bit? And you don't have to, I'm just going to throw in the song Free because I think Free is doing that, but you don't necessarily have to address that. But how do you see America and Free being in that kind of blues Juneteenth, where Prince is simultaneously discussing hell, but also celebrating the opportunities and the places where we can go through this?
Whew, Celia, you be doing stuff. Well, it's interesting because, and I don't know if this is going to do, so I think there's this idea, like, how does Prince link the the personal to the public and or the private to the public and the personal to the political, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so Free is using the metaphor of democracy. It's using the idea of a relationship to talk about democracy, using the idea of democracy to talk about a relationship, right? Like you're free to, like you're free to leave me, you're free to go do what you want to do, right? But it's like Black people have been in a relationship with America, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's a relationship that has not been perfectly harmonious. That is a relationship that has had some fights, has had some cussing outs, has had some putting out, right?
Right.
Has had some clothes being burnt up in somebody's car, right? Like that's a relationship. And so how do we use a relationship as a metaphor to talk about a political condition? Right? When talking about that political condition might be risky. When today talking about that political condition might get you picked up off the street
Right.
and detained and disappeared, right?
Right.
And so how do we talk about the political condition in a code, right? That allows that conversation to take place and still do this other work. So that's how I've always kind of understood free. And similarly with America, right? Like people are like, oh, even when you think of like Ronnie Talk to Russia, they're like, oh, this is like a pro-American song. You know, she may not be in the black, but she happy she ain't in the red. You know, that could both be she happy she ain't in the red, like i.e. communism, or she happy she ain't in the red when you're doing, and if you know accountants, right? Being in the black versus being in the red. Like, so there's a
Right.
double meaning here that allows the artist to create something that can be experienced and interpreted and engaged in multiple ways by multiple people. So, you know, it's not alienating in that respect, but also allows the artist a way to communicate something without having to say it outright, right? Which is part of this work. So, you know, to come to say all of that, to come back to your point about the blues, you know, it's like ain't nothing more American than being able to complain about America, right? Like that's and that is how you don't test the citizenship. You don't test the someone standing in society by the person who is like, I love this, right?
Right.
You test it by the person who's like, yeah, this ain't all that, and being able to say that, right? And so I think that that's how I see that. You know, the idea that within blues is that duality, that kind of containing the contradiction of like, I love, you know, I mean, I love you because I hate you, and I hate you because I
Right.
love you, right? Like, and not that there's hate here, but that it's a strong feeling, that there's a strong attachment. Like Black people are inextricably tied to this place, right? And and there's no way to kind of disentangle that without doing violence, which of course has been attempted.
Thank you so much. All right, so we got about 13 minutes. I'm gonna try to go really fast and get some really quick answers. Professor Comment, given the fact that Afrofuturism is about achieving humanity's highest state through spirituality rather than through technology, do you then see around the world in the day, not necessarily as Afrofuturism, but as a precursor through which Prince is attempting to achieve humanity's highest state, not through technology, but through spiritual involvement? And if so, what ways is he doing that?
Wow. Boy, see, Liz, whoa, okay. So I think that definitely we've got to look at one, you know, when this album was created. So
And let me sorry, because I think I knew I threw you off because I didn't get my question to your point. Because the fact that when people think psychedelics,
right,
it's about people achieving it through drugs.
exactly.
But Prince is clearly talking about psychedelic as achieving it through a spiritual and intellectual development. And that's where it's leading to that. Is that an Afrocentric thrust that he's doing? I'm sorry, I forgot out that part of the question. Go ahead.
No, that's okay because you saved me some time. So yeah, you're right in that. So I think what's happening with Prince, and even when we look at his influences, because I don't think when Prince talks about his influences it's so much as, hey, I got to be down for the brothers and show solidarity with the brothers. I think it's honest that these are his influences. This is his Mount Rushmore, and many of those people outside of Sly. In one of those books, Chaz talks about how Prince loved Sly, but he was always on drugs, and that like turned Prince off. So Prince, I don't think, was attracted to the altered state of being through drugs. It was the altered state of being through reaching a higher spiritual plane, this transcendence that allows Black people to escape metaphorically or spiritually honestly, from the, our constrictions here in America. So I definitely think there are themes on Around the World in a Day, from the ladder to temptation to just kind of across the board with Paisley Park, Condition of the Heart. There's a spirituality there. And when I look at those heroes, those greats who he's in conversation with, they are inviting us to go on this spiritual journey as well. And I also think that from the technological standpoint, that yes, there's technology here, but there is also real, just authentic playing. And I think that's a spiritual aspect of it too. Listening to that piano on Condition of the Heart or the Ladder, even if you strip everything down, that connection of the spirit. The quote I had about Stevie Wonder, he said he loved his approach to music and his connection to the spirit. And I think that's what Prince is doing on this album lyrically, and then also and I think really quickly also, that's why Prince's music doesn't sound dated like a lot of the people who were playing with the technology, because there was always that human spiritual element that he brought to it spiritually, but then also in terms of playing the instrument. So I think all of that helps to lead us in the direction of where Prince is going. And I hope that answered your question.
That is perfect. I want to go to the question box for Brother Zach, and that means I'm not going to get to my cosplay question, but Dr. Murray asks a great question, and she builds on the foundation of Dr. Wise's presentation. So to kind of shorten it, can you give us what kind of tools can we use to overcome listening to Around the World in a Day through the white gaze? So what can be done to keep listeners from being a slave, for lack of a better term, of understanding this album only through the white gaze?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think looking at it from different angles, like Camila's presentation did, I think is one great approach to it. I also just think, I don't know, my thing, because again, I'm approaching this from as a perspective of somebody who really loves Prince and really loves the Beatles, so to me, it's not like one doesn't have to suffer at the expense of the other. And so I think part of it to me is not being a zero-sum game. I think this this album and this music is so rich. And I mean, look, we've got, somebody in the chat pointed out, we've got the Beatles, we've got Maslow, we've got Ray Charles and Irving Berlin. There's so many ways that we can compare and so many reference points that we can bring in. And I don't think we need to limit ourselves to anything really, and I think that's kind of the beauty of art, is that there's not a certain amount of, there's not only this many influences and that's all we can afford, and so I think, yeah, keeping an open mind, being curious, listening to different things, if you haven't listened to Shuggie Otis, or you haven't listened to Earth, Wind and Fire or Rotary Connection, then check them out and maybe you'll find those connections. And I would also say, I saw in the chat Crystal mentioned she hasn't listened to a full Beatles album. If you haven't done that yet, give it a try. Try Revolver, and if you don't like Revolver, you probably won't like any of it, but try it.
So we got about 7 minutes, so I want to go quickly to Brother Johnson and then Brother Ali. Brother Johnson, just in a very quick way, can you tell us what either similarity or difference you see between the latter and anti-Christian?
Anti-Christian, well, anti-Christian is a lot more grounded in physical reality. As far as the the grittiness of the city and urbanity and urban life, and I would say that the latter is more spiritually oriented. It's more of a parable. But they both make a commentary on the importance of spirituality in self-development and the development of self-image. Um, I think that's the main comparison that I could draw. I mean, they're very different they're two very different animals, right? They both deal with a sense of spirituality and humanity that is very prevalent in Prince's entire body of work.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's perfect. And it proved that if you were upset by the Rainbow Children, your ass wasn't paying attention when Controversy and Anti-Christian came out. All right, so final one in these last 5 minutes, Brother Ali, Langston Hughes in The Negro Artist and the Racial Mountain says that the Black artist is always pulled by two forces. White folks telling us, hey, appeal to our stereotypes of you. Black folks saying, don't embarrass us. In what ways do you see America navigating those two distinct dual forces?
Uh, I mean, the way that is. You look at the critical reception, right? The critical reviews, right? You have some people who are like, oh, this is like a pro-American, anti-communist song, and then you have other people who are like, this is Sly the Family Stone. And I think Prince was just very skillful. Besides, I think there's some political and historical illiteracy amongst the critics who are, we've been saying this for a while in terms of understanding Prince and understanding where he's coming from. But I think even with that, I think Prince very strategically played on that, right? I think that I mean, for the most part, if you listen to America, it is a very somewhat, kind of build off of America the Beautiful, right? And you can take it that way. You can take it, the last verse is like, Jimmy, nothing, never said the Pledge of Allegiance. He said it wasn't cool. So you can be like, oh, see, this is what happens when you're not patriotic, right? Like, but then there's more to it, right? And so I think that the song allows both a critique of America and a celebration of an America. And I will say that, in geography, like critical geography, we talk about how like there are oftentimes overlaying maps, right? So there's like America, the United States of America, the state, the state, and then there's the America, the people, right? There's America, the culture. There's and the America, the people is not necessarily the same as the America, the state, right? And Prince's America is very much, a emerging vision that he's cultivating and curating through something like Paisley Park, right? It is something that he grew up in, like Prince's Minneapolis is not Minneapolis, right? And this has always been true. When Black people speak of America, it's like a talking at one hand about the super state, right? Let's just call it that. And on the other hand, talking about like, cousin and aunties and uncles and, the community, right? And I think it's important that Prince does not surrender that claim to America by naming the song America, right? Like he's like, I am going to take this. I am going to take this and claim this country for myself and for us.
And I think that you show that brilliantly by connecting it to Guthrie's work. And so when you said An America, I know a lot of people in the chat really appreciate when you said An America, and that is what Prince is doing, is saying, hey, we have a right to shape this America. And I just wanted to end on that point that Prince was giving us the right and the power to shape the dialogue, and the state of being that we wanted to. So we have 2 minutes. I want to get there we go, our fearless leader to the screen.
I thought I'm trying to show my Raspberry Beret.
Got a Raspberry Beret, there you go.
It's hard to do with these headphones, but such is life. Thank you so much for a brilliant presentation panel, and I knew that it would be. So thank you so much, my triplet. Thank you so much, Zach. Thank you so much, Chris. Thank you so much, Zaire. And obviously the deft moderation of C. Lee. And I hope that you will come back because we're going to take a 30-minute break so you can move your body, get some water, get some snacks, do some stretching, some yoga, because it's been a very long day, but you do not want to miss this Uber presentation from Arthur Turnbull about Around the World in a Day. And we're going to get started at 6:30, and it's going to be moderated by the amazing Chris Aguilar Garcia. And you got to come back if you've never seen Chris's tattoos. I hope that he will show all of the characters from around the world in a day. He has them tattooed on his arm, and it is really my favorite tattoo that I've ever seen on anyone. So I hope that Chris will share them with you. And so hopefully either one of those will get you to come back, Arthur's presentation or Chris's tattoos. So thank you again for this brilliant panel. And I'm going to end the webinar so we can get a break, and we'll be back here at 6:30. Bye, everyone.
Thank you, everybody.